of the Comstock. The titles, they come and they go like fortunes. 'Tis myself, Alison Eilliy, Orem Hunter Cowan Bowers. But it be the Bowers that be important, you ken. Now, it's true that as a Scot, I love a good story. So seat yourselves in because I'm preparing to tell you some real corkers. And I won't let the truth get in the way of a good story now, will I? I was born in the year of 1826 on the 9th of September in the royal burgh of Forfar, Scotland, in East Scotland countryside, the Highlands, if you will. Now, at the tender age of 15, I was a young bride. And my husband, Stephen Hunter, came to me and said the only way we was going to own any land was to go to the Americas as Mormons. So we converted and were transported. Now, once in the Americas, in Nauvoo, Illinois, it has an S. My husband, Hunter, he wanted to embrace the true Mormon doctrine by taking on more wives than myself. Well, I was having none of it, and I divorced him straight away. Be away with ya. Good riddance, I said. Now, with me pride intact, I took a position as a clerk in Mr. John Reese's store in Brigham Young's great city of Salt Lake. Now, eventually, I met and married another Mormon. Or how you wish, who else would I know? Well, this Mormon was by the name of Alexander Cowan, and he too had designs upon immigration to the valley of Carson beneath the Great Sierras. He secured a position as an assistant to the probate judge Orson Hyde there, and we arrived in a crude little settlement of Mormon Station. However, we looked to the north, to what was to become Washoe Valley, and we purchased 320 acres up against the hillside of what was to be Franktown for $100. And it was recorded as land claim number 2, ranch claim 2. Now, on September 9th of 1857, a message came from the great almighty ruler Brigham Young of the Mormons, calling all of his saints home to Salt Lake on the account that he had pissed off the President Buchanan and his disciples was going to war with the United States. Now, husband Cowan, he sided with Master Young and was going to leave with the rest of the saints. And I said, good riddance to ya, and be away. Bigamy again, don't you know? Now, with no other means of support, I was lucky to learn that just then gold was discovered in where else but Old Canyon, above Johnstown. So I took myself there straight away, and I opened a boarding house, and I fed the pathetic miners. And I did their laundry as well. I was so afraid of getting my hands dirty. Now, mining, as it is, one day flush, the next day flat. Some of the miners could not pay me for their room and board, so they gave me pieces of their mining claim. One like a James Rogers, who had a mining claim right next to none other than Lemuel Sanford Bowers. Well, let me tell you about the most handsome man I ever did see. Sondy Bowers, as he was called. And what a great fortune to have a claim next to me own, and to be the first millionaire on the Comstock, I'm proud to say. Lemuel Sanford Sondy Bowers was a Missouri mule skinner from Madison County, Illinois. It has an S. I was born in 1833. Now, he was well known around Gold Hill. He had several mining claims. He had the little Gold Hill mines. 20 feet of that was given to him by none other than Henry Comstock himself. Well, I'll tell you a story now. The miners in the Gold Hill restaurant were always trying to suggest that Sondy and I should get spliced, as Sam Davis would say. So then it was that the splicing took place on August 9th of 1859. Oh, and the hilarious miners, they gave us a wedding gift of $1 million. Or rather, the face value of a stock certificate that they thought was worthless. However, when the Comstock lode was discovered, my darling Sondy cashed in that certificate for darn near the face value of $1 million and became the first millionaire on the Comstock. Now, some mean tongues have wagged that my first husband wanted to take on more wives because I could not have children because I was barren. Oh, me Sondy and my union, we had two lovely wee bairns. Our first was John, after my brother. He was born in June of 60. But he died 2 months later. Our next was our darling Teresa. She was born about a year later, and she lived only 3 months to our great sorrow. Well, the point I'm making here is it would seem that Mr. Hunter's tallywhacker was out of whack and not backwards in purse. What are you giggling at, do you know? I tell you, a Highlander likes two things naked, one being malt whiskey. Well, the reporters on Mount Davidson, they were celebrities unto themselves. They reported on all of the happenings here, and I do mean all. Now, Sam Davis came here and eventually became the editor of the Virginia City Chronicle before becoming the editor of the Carson City Morning Appeal for his new bride, Nellie Nichols Davis. Oh, now he was a member of the Chautauqua Society and also the Sagebrush School. It was a literary movement that included Joseph T. Goodman, Dan DeQuille, and Mark Twain of the Territorial Enterprise newspaper. Oh, and my dear friend, Wells Drury, when he came here, he was hired by Alf Doughton of the Gold Hill News. Well, I knew his wife, Ella, when she was just a wee bairn. Ella Bishop she was at the time. Oh, she used to play at my house every day. Now, the Bishops were good friends to me and Miss Sondy, and they always spoke very highly of her husband. Ah, now a character and a carouser was that Alf Doughton, who came to us from the mining town of Cornwall, and eventually he became editor of the Gourds Hill News. And he would report on the news from the Gold Hill or the Divide and all through Virginia City. He also was a carouser with Dan de Quille and Mark Twain. I'll tell you another story. Alfred Doughton was keen on autopsies, and he attended the viewing of the body of Virginia's darling courtesan, Julia Goulet, who was murdered in January of '67. He also participated in her lavish and grossly attended funeral, and was there at her graveside when she was buried in the unsanctioned ground of Flowery Hill. Now, he and Mark Twain also attended the hanging of her poor, unfortunate murderer. And Mark Twain was here at the time to give a lecture at John Piper's Opera House, where, since the hanging proved to be more popular than Mark Twain's lecture on the Innocents Abroad, Doughton and Twain made no complaint over it. But I will ask you to not speak any more on that Goulet doxy. I did not approve of her and her kind, and to speak on it more would fash me so. Well, another imbiber and carouser was that Dan de Quille, the editor of the Territorial Enterprise and discoverer of Mark Twain when he was merely Samuel Clemens. Oh, de Quille was a friend to many. He wrote his book. Took him about 10 years to write the history of the Big Bonanza. Yes, he was at Mark Twain's home in the East when the Great Fire of 1875 erupted and the conflagration decimated most of the city. But it did give him a final chapter for his book. Oh, and speaking of that scoundrel, that trickster, and the humorist, Mark Twain. When he came here, he was a failure in every way. It's true. He was a failed Confederate soldier. He was a failed secretary to the Territorial Secretary, and he was a failed miner as well. It was under the careful eye and hand of Dan de Quille and Joseph T. Goodman that Mark Twain was born. And he spent over a year here honing his new skill when his sense of humor got him into trouble he no could get himself out of. He challenged a duel, and that was illegal at the time. And it was over a woman. We should let that count. And his brother Orrin sent him a telegram telling him that a warrant was sworn out for his arrest on himself, and he was to leave town immediately. And he did he? I'm reminded of one of my favorite sayings of his. He would say, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. Oh, the Comstock was a lot less lively after his departure, though. Oh, but one place that remains lively and shines like the gem that it does is John Piper's Opera House. Oh, to be on its stage is a pleasure and a privilege, aside from being in its audience. I will now tell you the story of John Piper's Opera House. John Piper acquired Thomas Maguire's opera house on D Street in February of 1867. It was the grandest theatre in the entire city at the time, and he named it John Piper's Opera House. But the Great Fire of 1875 destroyed his 8-year success in the beautiful building that me and Miss Sandy enjoyed so many productions and balls. He had hoped to find a lot on C Street to move his opera house away from the whores on the road, but to no luck. So he resigned to building Piper's behind his own bar on B Street in 1877. And as they say, third time's a charm, right? But after the Grand Mask Ball in 1883, John Piper's life was narrowly saved when he was rescued from a fire in his apartment there, and his new opera house burned down around him. But not a man to give up and give in. He used the gold coins that were saved from the fire in his safe as seed money for the beautiful opera house that you see standing there today. Now the persimmon boxes on your left and on your right. One was owned by the great John Mackey of the Big Four. Mackey, James Fair, and I forget their names sometimes. There's an O'Brien and a James Flood. We knew O'Brien and James Flood. I did not know them too personally. Of the Big Bonanza. The other box was owned by the dreaded William Sharon of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. But to many a delight, he was rarely in attendance in his box. Really not. Uncle Tom's Cabin was a big draw, and Emma Nevada sang to many a rapt audience she did. Now, I'll tell you, entertainment in these establishments on the early Comstock was not always what you expect to see today. No, many featured bear wrestling, dog fighting, hawk fighting, not what you're thinking, wished. There were lectures where thousands were in attendance. And during the time of the Big Four, it was the Gilded Age, as Mark Twain named it, and barbaric exhibitions gave way to more refined entertainment. But there is one story I can tell you from the early days of the Comstock. It's of Auntie's Big Pension. Now, Max Walter's Music Hall was a favorite of many here on the Comstock, but his patrons sometimes had interesting ways of letting him know if they were not pleased. Now, Max had acquired this old lady vocalist from San Francisco by the name of Antoinette Adams, dubbed Auntie for short. She stood 6 foot tall and had a voice that was somewhere between a Washoe canary and a squeaky wheelbarrow. Now a crowd gathered in Gold Hill, and they marched up to Virginia City, gathering more supporters on the way. They were determined to pension her out and let her go. So, when Auntie's turn came to perform, an audience member stood up and said, "Gentlemen, 3 cheers for Auntie." Well, to make a long story so, when Auntie was through with singing in her usual squeaky way, the audience erupted in pretend enthusiasm and shied $50 onto the stage. Well, so Auntie came back and she sang Under the Willow once again. This time, though, her upper register showed some weakness. And when she was finished, they shied the $50 onto the stage once again. Now, by her third encore, she could no longer produce a note. And the next evening, the same group gathered in Gold Hill, this time led by Alec Doughton. And they came to Max and they said, "We demand that you let Auntie sing all evening." And Max could no acquiesce to their demand. So they all turned and retired to the nearest saloon. Now, when the time came for the performance and no one showed, 'twas then that Max understood. You see, Max judged his talent by the salary that his performers charged. And Auntie was shrewd enough to ask for a big one. So Max wasted no time and let Auntie go, placed her on the stage, and sent her a walk over the Geiger grade. Perhaps it's time for me to tell you more of my own story. After my darling Sandy and I was married, and the Comstock Road was discovered, I began divorce proceedings against Mr. Cowan. I did. And I was awarded 160 acres of the Cowan Ranch in the Washoe Valley as alimony. Well, in 1862, we began to build our grand mansion. It would be the grandest mansion west of the Mississippi. Oh, quartz was mined from behind our property, and stone was cut by skilled stone cutters from Scotland, nonetheless. It was a two-story building that mantles would be carved out of fine Italian marble was in the plans, and artificial lakes to be made from the hot springs on our property, and to furnish our mansion in the manner befitting of it. We planned a grand tour of Europe, we did. And I had a beautiful gown made as I planned to meet Grand Queen Victoria herself, due to our place and status of society. Now, before we left on our tour, Miss Sandy, he contracted the International Hotel up here on C Street. Oh, it was a grand affair. Anybody who was anybody was there in attendance. And nothing but the finest of food and drink were procured. Champagne flowed like the water from a spring flood. And he asked that everyone toasted to me and to me health. And money, he proclaimed, was no object. So it was in April of 1862 that we left for our grand tour and sailed on 2 ships to Liverpool. The first was the SS Golden Gate out of San Francisco. And then we were to sail on the RMS Persia. You thought I was going to say Titanic. So did I. That was a ship for the future. And I will know. RMS Persia to Liverpool. And it was in New York that one of my greatest dreams was realized. We adopted a wee baby girl from her mother who could no care for her. We named her Margaret Persia after the ship on which we were to sail. 'Twas a grand trip, it was. We visited with my own family, and we brought along with us silver from the Comstock to be fashioned for our own use. We purchased furnishings the likes that you had never seen in the States, and we enjoyed becoming parents once again. My only disappointment was that Grand Queen Victoria herself would no see me, on account that I was a divorced woman. Well, she was living a recluse and in mourning, so I ask you, which one of the two of us was truly living? Eventually, we returned home to our Grand Washoe Valley residence, only to find that our life was to no be as grand as we had expected. All the silver that we had taken with us to be fashioned for our use was returned to us in paste. It was not the silver we had provided. We were outraged. And me darling Sandy was no telling me how much he had to borrow to keep the Bowers mine afloat, as mining was experiencing a decline. Eventually, he moved back to our Gold Hill home to oversee the mines, leaving me Persia and myself in the Carson Valley mansion. On April 21 of 1868, my darling Sandy died of the dreaded lung disease. On his dying bed, he begged his Masonic brothers to bury him on the soil of his Washoe Valley home. He was only the age of 35 years. And me Persia and myself, we were left in a state of mourning and despair. Me dear Sandy had taken out many a loan to keep the Bowers mine afloat, and we were left with nothing. We were left with nothing to our names. Almost immediately, I set about to making our mansion turn a profit. Why, I held balls and excursions, fanfare excursions and picnics. Well, on New Year's Eve of 1870, I hosted the Woman's Right Ball. It was a resounding success. And in years after, I continued to host picnics and dances and balls and excursions, all for a price. And I stayed on as the grand hostess. I even advertised the mansion as a health resort. And in 1872, when the Virginia and Truckee Railroad out of Carson was completed, and it went right by the beautiful mansion grounds, bringing with it more celebrations and more fanfare excursions. However, I found that I could not make a profit, and I could not pay all my debts. And to add to my great sorrow, my dear Persia, at the young age of 12, passed away unexpectedly on July 14th of 1874. My heart was finally broken. Oh, I should not have put this down. No, please, I just put it down. Well, I will tell you true. I did not mind sharing the gift of sight with me close friends. I come from a long line of series where we have the gift of sight of the future. We use a peepstone, as we call it, a crystal that comes from the hills above my Scotland home. This one time, another story, of course. This one time, I was visiting Genoa. It was formerly known as Mormon Station, and I had befriended a Mrs. Lawrence Frey, who was the recent owner of Ranch Claim Number 1. You will recall the Cowan Ranch was Ranch Claim Number 2. So as my telling goes, Mrs. Frey asked me to take a look into my peepstone to see after the ramblings of her husband, who had gone over the Sierra to Hangtown to do some business. Well, I'll tell you, true as the day, I saw the man standing at the end of a board, taking drink, and doing business of the family Frey. I told the woman, get yourself down there and bring the bugger home. Now, well, mayhap you've heard this before, but I want to tell you of our very own famous mailman of the Sierra, our own John Snowshoe Thompson. He was the champion, he was. But he would tell everyone how I could predict legends that would play out well. Well, there was this one time where my peepstone that I was using at present became cloudy, and I could not see no more, and I was in need of a new one. So, dear Mr. Thompson, we went a walk over the hills, over the Sierra, to the town of Sacramento, and asked about for a peepstone. Well, he suffered greatly for the asking of it, as no one knew what a peepstone was. But I blessed him for his dedication and his fortitude. Now, I did not mind telling the fortunes for my friends, but after the death of me darling Sandy, and me no making a go at the mansion, my dear friends convinced me to do me viewing and scrying for profit. I cannot tell you how it fetched me so, but I could not deny the needing of it. So I set up rooms here in Virginia City. But when the mining started to play out, I then took rooms in San Francisco and Reno for giving the readings. So it be, I went from Queen of the Comstock to the Great Washoe Series. Now, eventually, my eyesight was going. And my dear friends, my champions, would help me when I needed something, like writing a letter or such, like my good friend Hannah Clapp, who was a school teacher in Carson. You remember, she's responsible for the beautiful fence about the Capitol. And my dear friend Annie Roberts, whose own son Richard had the gift of sight himself, where they would write letters on my own behalf. And I wrote several times to Senator William Stewart, who himself was a pioneer of our Nevada territory. And I begged him to acknowledge that my darling Sandy had given $14,000 to the government for the Paiute Indian War in 1860. Could he no give me 1,000 for my own burial? Well, he respectfully refused, on account I could no supply receipts. Receipts that were destroyed in the Great Fire, nonetheless. No wonder Mark Twain called him Bully, Raggy, and Bitter Stewart. Well, then, eventually, my hearing failed me, and I was placed in the poorhouse in Reno. Oh, and when they could no care for me, the Daughters of the Eastern Star, Ada Chapter, took care of me and placed me in the King's Daughters' Home in Oakland, California, on account I had been an esteemed member of their organization. And this was after they learned of my terrible plight in the newspaper. Well, you'll be asking yourself about now, if I am the great Washoe Seeress, how can I now see me own death and that of me loved ones, when all the while I can see successful mining claims and such, and the disastrous fire of the Yellow Jacket mine in 1869, and a great conflagration in 1875. Well, I'll tell you true now. The spirits only show me what they want me to see in me peepstone. Perhaps they don't want me to grieve afore it's necessary. I only ask this, that after me dying day, I'm afforded the right to be buried next to me darling Sunday and me dear Persia, on the grounds that was once our Washoe Valley home, where we had so many queens. I am reminded of the words of the great Scottish bard, Rabbie Burns. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dears, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. I bless you.